Marshmallows are for team players, Dylan.
Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Colton Ogburn, and these are all the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in Severance Season 2, Episode 4, Woe's Hollow. We finally have confirmation that Helly hasn't been Helly at all, but instead Helena Eagon undercover as...
She's a Mo!
So a little later, I want to break down all of the clues that it was Helena all along. But first, there is so much else that happened in this episode that we need to talk about. Like, what the hell are these things? Seriously, like, I'm channeling my inner Dylan here.
What the is that?
Here's a hint for you. We've already seen one of these twin monstrosities earlier this season, and season 1 already showed us exactly how these things were made. And of course, we need to break down what Irving saw on this screen in his vision quest through Woe's Hollow. It is wild. And guys, you know, I love this cast. I mean, like, seriously, best ensemble cast on television right now, and I've often struggled when asked who my favorite character is, but after this episode, I think I finally know who my fave is, and that's Irving B. So we open in this snowy mountain setting, which I actually think isn't all that far from the Lumen office. I think this is all happening in the snowy mountains and woods that we've seen surrounding Lumen. So Milchek mentions the 4th appendix.
Kier dictated a 4th appendix in his final hours of life.
Now, the first 3 appendices, whatever, they are what we and the Severed gang know as the Compliance Handbook. These books are the word of Kier, and of course they are very Bible-esque. They dictate how one is to behave as a member of the Lumen family.
And I shall whisper to ye, dutiful through the ages. In your noblest thoughts and epiphany shall be my voice.
Now, Milchek says that this 4th appendix was a last-minute writing in Kier's dying hours, and that it has been forbidden on the severed floor. Now, after hearing that, my immediate thought was that this whole 4th appendix thing was just, you know, like a recently thought-up new series of manipulations, an update to the handbook to further lie to and control the severed employees in this new era following the MDR uprising. Now, while I do think there is totally some eerie and evil shit going on in the depths of Lumen, and I think that things like the 9 core principles are connected to the 9 circles of hell, I do simultaneously, however, think a lot of this appendix shit, I think this lore of Kier, it's all made up nonsense crafted to control their underlings. Yes, some employees like Cobell actually buy into the cult, but I think there are others who are fully aware that it's BS and they're just using it to control people. Now, Milchek says that in the cave where they will find the 4th appendix, they will be standing in the same place where Kier tamed the 4 tempers for the first time. Remember, the 4 tempers are woe, frolic, dread, and malice. We see these listed on the bottom of the MDR screens, and we've seen them depicted in this painting as well at Dylan's waffle party in season 1. Taming the 4 tempers essentially symbolizes taming those 4 tempers within oneself, making the severed employee more obedient and content in their slave labor, fooling them into thinking that they are serving some greater purpose. Now, here shortly, I want to talk about Dieter Eagon, Kier's twin, and the significance of twins in this greater mission of Lumen. But first, I really need to talk about these things. They are so damn creepy and just unsettling. They feel
Unnatural.
Thank you, clone of Emperor Palpatine, but seriously, these things make my chest a little tight every time they popped up in this episode. The Marquand is all chipper like he is in season 1 before he became a rebel. Dylan is like super angry, echoing his violent outburst in season 1. Irving is, well, Irving, a mild-mannered non-boat rocker, which is how he was in season 1, not so much anymore. We especially see that in this episode. And Helly, Jesus Christ, Helly, that one is terrifying. The way her head is like moving around and the way she has her arms, it's like she's analyzing and trying to learn how to appear more human. It's anxiety inducing, man. And when I get anxious, I tend to have these really bad facial tics where I'll like clench my jaw or bite the inside of my mouth. And these type of bad oral fixation habits, they are really self-destructive. And I'm sure you have your own bad habits that you use to cope with your own stresses and anxieties. Now, me personally, my major New Year's resolution was to get control of my anxiety and in the bad oral fixation habits that I have. So I'm glad that I have Fume, the sponsor of this video. Fume is an award-winning flavored air device that draws flavor to your mouth, not your lungs. It's a great way to satisfy your oral fixation with non-toxic flavors, and it's safe to use anywhere. I want to show you guys there is no vapor here. It does not need batteries, and you don't have to like change it. It just has these little flavor pods tucked inside here, and there are some delicious flavors like crisp mint and orange vanilla, and with flavored air you can satisfy that bad oral fixation habit through a passive diffusion system that uses no electronics, no vapor or combustion. Also, it just looks cool. I love how it's weighted, and it's also a great fidget tool that makes an incredibly satisfying sound. And Fume is also a huge money saver at 1/3 the cost of your other bad habit. It's completely safe, and they continuously invest in third-party studies to ensure the safety of their products, and it is backed by doctors here in the US. Now, Fume has already helped over 300,000 people build better habits, so try Fume today. And if you order the Journey Pack now using my code ScreenCrush, you'll get a free Fume topper and an awesome accessory to level up your experience. So go to tryfume.com/ScreenCrush or scan the QR code on screen to get your Journey Pack today. So like I was saying, we meet these 4 creepy as hell copies of the MDR team, essentially confirming the long theorized cloning mission that's been happening at Lumen. Now, in my notes when I was watching this episode, I actually wrote down that they look extremely uncanny, and I even wrote that they look 3D printed. And then I remembered, holy shit, that Optics and Design had a lab full of 3D printers, Stratus F370 3D printers to be exact. I think these unholy creations were totally printed up on the Severed floor in Optics and Design, and we actually saw one creeping around the Severed floor halls in the season premiere. Huge shout out to our post-production manager Harriet for calling that early on that this guy behind Mark was Mark.
Oh, hi, Mark.
So I think I know exactly what these things are, and the mission of Lumen is becoming more and more clear. One, they're mastering an understanding of consciousness and how to access consciousness as a tangible thing. And then they want to learn how to take that consciousness and merge it with a new body, essentially achieving immortality. MDR is doing work based on emotion. We're seeing them group the numbers 1 through 9, like the 9 principles, into the buckets that are labeled with the 4 tempers. This work, I think, is each individual worker essentially creating readable computer code of their mind, or their soul, if you will. This would make it to where theoretically one's consciousness could be uploaded to a machine much like an artificial intelligence, and then that uploaded mind could be transferred to a newly created body, a body mirroring that of your former self. And like I've said before, they're trying to resurrect Kier. That's what this whole thing is about. Now, last week I mentioned that I think Kier is still alive in some sense. The show has been all about what it means to be you.
Who are you?
We have the commentary, of course, about the severed employees representing the complexities of self, as well as Ricken's book, The You Are. I think Kier, being a power-hungry, self-indulgent, oligarchic madman with a serious god complex, was likely plagued and burdened by the fact that no matter how much money he had, the one thing he couldn't buy his way out of was the cold embrace of death. So I think Kier's mission, and Lumen's overall, has become the mastering of immortality and finally making eternal life possible. We've talked before about how Kier is essentially representative of God, but also a charlatan who's created like this fictional thing that he expects people to follow and believe, and it leads to people praising him and thinking he's the answer to everything and serving him. So anyway, he views himself as God, and his cult-like followers do as well. And I mean, this painting alone where Kier like tames the 4 tempers, it depicts Kier as like a smiteful deity. Everyone at Lumen is called a child of Kier. The dogmatic writings in the handbook are telling you how to live your life. You know, I'm a big Star Wars guy. We see that in Star Wars as well, with the cloning stuff and the Sith wanting to achieve immortality, and how the Emperor seduced Anakin Skywalker, brought him to the dark side with the promise of immortality for his wife. This is a thematic story that we've seen written way back in ancient times, but even into modern day with stuff like Star Wars and of course in this show. I think in some way, shape or form, they have managed to keep a piece of Kier alive, likely as an artificial intelligence. I even theorized last week that Kier himself could be the board, and I saw some great comments saying like, what if it is an AI of Kier existing on like a computer board, like a program of Kier? And at this moment, he is like currently without form. He's without a physical body, but that's what they're working on. They're trying to figure out out how to tangibilize that consciousness and transfer it into these bodies that they're trying to learn how to build that are synthetic and immortal. Now, the Severance procedure is likely a research-based operation trying to master consciousness transfer as well as 3D printed artificial synthetic bodies that are superior to human biology. Again, not to keep talking about Star Wars, but Palpatine and the Sith, they wanted to master essence transfer so they could stay alive. Now, part of me is worried that Miss Casey, or Gemma, Mark's wife, is one of these things, one of these 3D printed people, and that her true self really did burn in that car accident. I mean, we've seen Miss Casey act like super weird and do like the head tilting thing and like she's super socially awkward. I think that she could be a more advanced, more established, more evolved version of these 3D printed things. Now, throughout watching this episode, I took vigorous notes during the 2 reading scenes from the 4th appendix and the journey of Kier and Dieter. I was gonna do this really big breakdown of what the story means and what it symbolizes, and I still am. I mean, it is a Colton video, but I have to say that Helly, or Helena, I should say, pretty much summed up the deeper meaning perfectly.
He melted, right? He turned into the forest because he masturbated.
We seriously need to get her on the payroll.
You guys are getting paid?
So yeah, basically this story was about punishment for self-indulgence. Dieter pleasured himself and was taken by nature for his sin. This mirrors stories in the Bible, like Adam and Eve's betrayal of God by eating from the tree of knowledge and then becoming ashamed of being naked, which is all of course an allegory for them having had sex and indulging in self-service and pleasure against the will of their God, and thus bringing sin into the world. These themes are found a lot in the Bible, with stories like Sodom and Gomorrah and various other religious texts throughout the past that demonize things like sex and masturbation. That's super common in a lot of the world's major and non-major religions. So it makes sense that Lumen would have this be a part of Kier's dogma, seeing as fraternization between severed employees is forbidden. And then of course in this same episode we actually see Mark and Helena have sex for the first time. A little bit on that in a second. And now another thing that Lumen essentially bans and Kier doesn't allow is lustful type emotions, like longing for something beyond that of doing the work of Kier. Now, this also ties into the understanding of what it means to tame the temper of woe. These teachings of Kier, specifically taming the feeling of woe, are meant to rid you of despair, sorrow, and stress, also you may better serve Kier. And this lesson of taming an emotion like woe is by severing yourself from self-indulgences like lust and even love for anyone or anything beyond that of Kier. Kier tamed his own temper of woe by letting go of his love and his grief for his brother. The story of Dieter is all about Kier allowing his love for his brother to make him weak. He even says, "My love for my twin unbalanced my judgment." So Kier is saying that his attachments were weaknesses and he must let go of his love for his brother and his grief for his brother following his death so that he, Kier, may thrive. And guys, I have to say, I think Kier totally killed his brother in a Cain and Abel type fashion. There are many stories of rivaling brothers throughout history and in various different religions, but one that comes to mind is the story of Cain and Abel. A story not only found in the Bible, but also in the Quran and various other books. Now, this story of these two brothers is essentially a commentary on the consequences of sin and mastering one's own emotions. In that story, Cain and Abel, the children of Adam and Eve, they're two brothers. Cain is a farmer and he offered fruit to God as a sacrifice, while Abel, who is a shepherd, offered God the firstborn of his flock, which of course could tie into all the goat stuff that we saw going on in the previous episode. Now, we've talked before in our previous breakdowns of this season how the goats could be tied to sacrificial themes in this story of Kier and the greater mission of Lumen. So anyway, in the story of Cain and Abel, God prefers the sacrifice that Abel brought him. This then fills Cain with tempers of jealousy and rage, and it leads to him murdering his brother. So we hear this said about Dieter's death.
It popped from the socket, driven by a sudden torrent of pus from his skull.
Now, when I hear that his eye popped out and his head was bleeding, that makes me think that Kier probably hit him over the head with a rock. And all this talk about his hair turning to moss is simply describing Dieter's return to Earth, his return to nature as he decomposes. And his dead self returning to nature echoes the theme of Dieter always being with Kier. He is a part of him now, even in death. Throughout the episode, we hear Helena, Irving, and Kier read aloud from the book, but we also hear Kier himself reading in what sounds like an old recording of the man, the myth, the legend, Kier. And hey, speaking of Kier, be sure to check out our Praise Kier shirt up on the merch store right now. So when we hear Irving ask if the story is true, it plays into the parallel of other cults like the cult of Kier throughout our own history, using stories that may or not be literally true as a form of allegory or metaphor to teach a lesson. Any outsider can understand the message, but a true follower of said cult would say things like,
Every word is truth.
so here we can see ice forming on the ends of these branches, and to me they looked like the hands of a baby. A baby being born of nature would echo in a reverse fashion Dieter returning to Earth upon his death when he broke down and decomposed, and these ice baby hands forming off this branch could be like a rebirth type thing. And of course we've seen Kier as a baby in the opening intro. There's some just weird shit going on here. So anyway, Helly mocks the writings of Kier, which is interesting considering that Helly isn't Helly, it's Helena. So I'm wondering if Helena like genuinely thinks this is all horseshit that's spoon-fed to the innies and that it's ridiculous, or if this is part of her attempt to make the group believe that she truly is Helly, especially with Irving being more and more suspicious of her up to this point. Now, I think it's probably a little bit of both. Helena is trying to be that Trojan horse to win the war between Lumen and MDR on behalf of her father, but I also wouldn't be surprised if she does find some of this stuff a little silly, and she may be a little tired of existing under her father's thumb and the overwhelming shadow of Kier Eagon. Now, this rebellious phase that we're seeing within Helena is continued when she hooks up with Mark. So we discussed in previous breakdowns how Helena is jealous of her innie. She wants that love that Helly has found down on the severed floor. She is angered that her innie has found something that she hasn't. And she too seems to have developed her own infatuation with Mark. But guys, this is just gross. I'd argue that Helena is, she's sexually assaulting Mark here. She's pretending to be someone else in order to have sex with him. And that's f***ed up. And it's such a violation of Mark. I made this same argument in The Boys season 4 when, spoiler alert, by the way, for that season, when we saw a shapeshifter pretend to be Starlight and have sex with Huey. That was some messed up shit that I felt that they kind of just glossed over. So I hope that this show actually takes the time to acknowledge how Mark must feel after realizing he was taken advantage of, and how this special moment was actually Mark's first time, and it was all a lie. Helena robbed that experience from Mark and from Helly, and it really pisses me off. It makes me hate her even more. But, you know, at the same time, you also kind of feel bad for her a little bit. Here she says,
Like who I was on the outside.
Now, this could be yet another attempt at making sure Mark thinks that she really is Helly, but I think that there's some truth here. I think Helena doesn't like who she is on the outside, and I think she's jealous of the independent, rebellious spirit that her innie has. She's jealous of her innie finding love and bucking a system that Helena may have wanted to buck her entire life, but never knew it was an option. Okay, so anyway, Mark and Helena, they're doing the deed, and then we see for the first time in this episode, Mark S. experiencing reintegration. In the previous episode, we saw Mark undergo the procedure, so when this episode started and there was no reference to the procedure, I was a little confused. But we have to remember that unsevering is a process. In season 1, we saw Petey's unsevering transition take quite some time, and it's not an instantaneous thing.
Hey, what's that, Sudoku?
It's nothing.
So while they're having sex, Mark sees Helena glitch in his own mind, and he sees Miss Casey. This is showing us Mark's innie and outtie's memories beginning to combine. His innie is having sex, triggering memories of his outie having sex with his wife, Miss Casey, or Gemma. There's also the fact that Mark S. loves Helly and Mark Scout loves Gemma, so those emotions of love are being entangled as he begins to unsever. Now, this glitching between Helly and Miss Casey also echoes this shot from the new series intro, where we see the same thing happen with Helly and Miss Casey in the elevator through the eyes of Mark. So back with Irving, as he ventures through the woods on his own journey of sorts, echoing that of Kier's journey, we see him have a vision of Bert, for which Irving is feeling woe in his mourning of his dead lover. That fact is then driven home when we see the Gaunt Bride. So on this screen, we can see the numbers 1, 4, 5, and 7. Now, if we assume that the numbers 1 through 9 that we normally see on their screens are representative of Lumen's 9 core principles, then 1, 4, 5, and 7 would represent vision, humility, nimbleness, and wiles. Each of those numbers viewers would connect to what is happening in this episode. Irving's vision quest would represent vision and his ability to see Helena for the imposter she is. Dylan expresses humility in his cry out to Irving.
I'm sorry! I should have listened!
Irving also expresses a sense of humility when he graciously accepts his path to eternal darkness following the unmasking of Helena. Irving also expressed nimbleness in his swift maneuvers to reveal Helena's true self to the team, and of course Wiles would be representative of Helena's manipulations and deceptions pretending to be Helly. Now, when we see this screen full of letters, specifically the letters E, A, G, O, and N, what does that spell? Eagon.
Can you spell that for me?
We then see the numbers form the shape of a face and a blinking eyeball, reminiscent of this scene in the first episode from this season when Mark's screen of numbers transforms into Miss Casey. Now, with these letters spelling out Eagon, I think it's clear that this was meant to be the moment that not only led Irving to the confirmation that Helly was her outie, Helena, but that her outie was an Eagon.
She's not Helly! She's an Eagon!
Milchick says,
Remove the Glasgow block now.
Now, we actually saw the Glasgow block listed here in Season 1 next to the overtime contingency and various other severed settings. Irving says,
Hang in there!
which is an expression he likely picked up from this new office poster featuring Dylan holding the two switches to keep the overtime contingency active. And that poster was inspired by this cat poster you can find in office buildings around the country. So I've been saying since episode 1 that this wasn't Helly, but it was Helena, pretending to be her innie so that she could get intel on the rebellious MDR. And a lot of you guys said I was crazy thinking this, so to all of you, I say, seriously though, I have felt it was pretty obvious it was Helena this whole time. Let me explain. From the moment that she stepped out of the elevator onto the severed floor the first time this season, she just seemed like she was putting on a show. There's this moment in the break room where she says,
He said there were no microphones in here.
Yeah, he says a lot of shit, so just fucking whisper it.
Helly has never, will never, would never believe a word that came out of Milchick's mouth. We also have her lying about what she saw on the outside. And I get the argument that people were saying that she was, ashamed of and scared of how her friends might react learning that she's an Eagon, and maybe she was scared that they would turn on her, but man, that just isn't Helly. She's super transparent, especially with her friends, and she had already made it clear that she had a disdain for her innie back in season 1.
And if you ever do anything to my fingers, know that I will keep you alive long enough to horribly regret that.
So when she said that, that was when I was really like, that is not Helly. There was also like several moments throughout the first 4 episodes where she just carries herself differently. She speaks differently. Even the weight of her eyes seems different. And all the credit in the world to Britt Lauer for perfecting this distinction between these two characters. The whole cast is great at that, but she takes it a step further and she is portraying one character trying to portray the other character. It's Severance Inception, and I loved it. So this episode was a great episode overall, but specifically for Irving, he killed it, and this episode really cemented him as my favorite character of the series. In this episode, Irving essentially followed in the footsteps of Kier in this story of Dieter. He tamed the temper of woe, but then like Dieter, instead of Kier, he drifted into the great unknown when Milchick terminated him.
May Kier's mercy follow you into the eternal dark.
So guys, let me know. Do you think Irving B is gone for good, or will he have a triumphant return and rejoin the team in their takedown of Lumen? Reminder that we have these great Severance-inspired shirts up on the merch store right now, ScreenCrushMerch.com. I also want to hear your thoughts on how Helly will respond to Helena pretending to be her this whole time, and how Mark will react to having hooked up with the enemy within. Let me know your thoughts on all of that down in the comments below, or you can at me on Twitter or in our Discord. Like I said, you can always yell out the window, that's fun. Link in the description below for all that stuff. I want to thank you so much for watching. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Colton Ogburn.